She was 5 minutes early and already invisible. The glossy courthouse steps reflected the sun like a stage light, and Thomas Hargreave, senior litigation partner at Holloway, and Dean, stood in its glare as though waiting for an award. His suit perfectly pressed, his phone pressed to his ear, his tone acidic. "I swear, Bill, these DEI quotas are turning firms into zoos. Yesterday, I walked into the boardroom and couldn't even tell who was running the meeting. One of them had pink hair. Another spoke in they and them. I mean, what are we even doing?" He laughed without humor, unaware that the black SUV pulling up to the curb was not just his ride, but his reckoning. The window rolled down, and a poised black woman, dressed in a slate-gray pantsuit with a matching silk blouse, nodded toward him. She had a calm, deliberate confidence, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. Thomas glanced at her once, then dismissed her. "Perfect. The driver's here. Let's not get lost, Miss Alicia," she replied, neutral and professional. "Yeah, okay," he muttered, sliding into the passenger seat without so much as eye contact. "GPS on, please. Can't have you pulling one of those scenic detours. We've got court in 20 minutes. She didn't respond, just drove. As they made their way through Atlanta's downtown traffic, Thomas continued his monologue, each sentence a razor blade coated in privilege. "I don't get it. Why they want to be in law anyway? It's not a job for service people. Park the cars, guard the doors, drive us to trial. That's where they belong. But give them a scholarship and suddenly they think they're Thurgood Marshall." He laughed again, missing the tightening of her knuckles on the steering wheel. He didn't know the Tesla was recording. She did. He didn't notice her subtle glance in the rearview mirror when he said, "And honestly, don't even get me started on black women in suits. That's like putting pearls on a bulldog and calling it classy." The silence that followed was surgical. He got out in a rush when they arrived, slamming the door without a thank you. "Grab a coffee or something. We'll be a while," he barked, vanishing up the stairs. She stayed seated for a moment longer, exhaled quietly, then looked up at the building. 10 minutes later, Judge Ramirez called the courtroom to order. The prosecutor approached the bench with calm precision. She stood tall, poised, in that same slate-gray suit, hair pinned in a neat chignon. The gallery didn't murmur. They gasped. Thomas turned toward the voice, puzzled, then froze mid-turn. "This morning I was mistaken for a driver," Alicia said, setting a thick folder on the table with a satisfying thud. "That assumption is now Exhibit A." Gasps again. Thomas turned white. His client, a banking executive with a 6-figure tie and a 7-figure racism lawsuit, sank back in his chair. "Your Honor, Alicia Montgomery for the prosecution, and this—" She pulled out her phone, voice calm, devastating. "Is a recording taken en route to this courthouse." Thomas lunged forward, panic in his voice. "That's entrapment. She was pretending." "She was existing," the judge cut in. Alicia tapped play. The courtroom listened. Thomas's voice filled the room like poison. "Let them stay in the service industry. They don't belong here." The words echoed through the chambers, louder than the gavel that followed. She didn't look at Thomas. She didn't need to. He was already unraveling. Thomas Hargreave had been in hundreds of courtrooms. He'd won multi-million-dollar verdicts, humiliated junior associates with a look, and once had a judge apologize mid-trial for interrupting him. He knew this arena. It belonged to men like him. But today, the floor didn't feel solid beneath him. The ceiling felt low. And Alicia Montgomery wasn't supposed to be standing where she was. He tried to mask the panic in his chest with a smirk, but it cracked too easily. "Alicia Montgomery," he muttered under his breath. "Federal prosecutor?" His client, Howard Langston, leaned over. "That's the driver. That's her, right?" Thomas nodded slowly, lips pressed tight. "Yeah," Langston hissed. "What the hell kind of game is this?" But Alicia was already speaking, calm, deliberate, with the weight of someone who didn't need to shout to command a room. "Your Honor, as part of our case establishing a hostile and racially discriminatory work environment at Apex National Bank, we submit this audio file as foundational context. The voice is that of lead defense counsel, recorded on public property in the presence of a witness." Judge Ramirez raised an eyebrow. "Do you have authentication of this recording? GPS metadata, timestamp, voice match, and," she added, without looking at Thomas, "I'm happy to play it again, if needed." "No," Ramirez said too quickly. "The court accepts it into evidence, for now." The jury didn't even glance at Thomas. They stared at the screen, still reeling. A few shook their heads slowly, as if trying to process what they'd just heard. One juror, middle-aged, white, with a flag pin, looked at Thomas with something close to disgust. The air felt colder. Thomas swallowed. Hard. This wasn't just a PR nightmare. It was a career funeral, and he'd just given the eulogy himself. They recessed for lunch. Outside the courtroom, reporters had already gathered, buzzing like flies around an open wound. Thomas avoided them, ducking into the bathroom and locking himself in a stall. He stared at the tile. How the hell did I not see it? He replayed the morning in his head, her silence in the car, the way she gripped the wheel, the fact that she never responded, only listened. She knew exactly what she was doing. He sat on the toilet lid, head in his hands. Somewhere deep inside him, the thought crept up like rot. You underestimated her because she was black, because she was a woman, because you've been allowed to underestimate people your whole damn life. Back in the courtroom, Alicia didn't slow down. She wasn't theatrical. She didn't need to be. Her voice was precise, like a scalpel, peeling back the layers of Apex Bank's culture, one policy, one email, one ignored complaint at a time. She called on Ava Jenkins, a black woman who had worked in mid-level HR for 6 years and had filed multiple reports about discriminatory hiring practices. None were ever addressed. "Who received these reports?" Elisha asked. "Mr. Langston," Ava replied, "and Thomas Hargrave, legal counsel." "Were they acknowledged?" "No." "Were they ever followed up on?" "No." "Were you ever retaliated against?" "Yes." A murmur passed through the gallery. Alicia raised a thick file. "These," she said, "are the complaints. 17 to be exact, all filed over 5 years. Not a single one investigated." Langston squirmed. Thomas stared straight ahead, jaw locked. She continued. "Elijah Redd, junior analyst, fired after confronting a supervisor for calling him one of the good ones. Leah Price, passed over for a promotion 5 times, replaced by white interns each time. Her resume, Ivy League, double major. Dante Hughes, caught on security footage being shoved by a manager. The manager, still employed. Dante, blacklisted." Each name was a stone on Langston's chest, each file another nail. But she never looked at Thomas. Not once. He wasn't the target. He was just a symptom. In the hallway, a young black man in a janitor uniform stood outside the courtroom, watching silently. "Who is she?" he asked one of the clerks. "Alicia Montgomery," the clerk whispered, almost reverently. He smiled to himself. About damn time. Inside, Judge Ramirez called for closing arguments the next morning. Thomas hadn't slept. He looked like a man who'd been walking in a storm with no coat. He stood, walked to the front, and tried to summon the force of his old confidence. But his voice was thinner, his tone defensive. "We've heard allegations, accusations, But I urge this court to look at the facts, real facts, not emotional narratives. His words fell flat. Even he didn't believe them anymore. When Elisha rose, the room stilled. Not from fear, from gravity. "You've heard the facts," she said. "You've seen the documents. You've listened to the language used, not just in emails or meetings, but in private moments when people thought no one was listening." She paused, letting that sit. Because that's what this case is about. Not just paperwork, not just policy, but perspective, assumption, invisibility. She looked directly at the jury for the first time. "When I drove Mr. Hargreave to court, I watched him talk about people like me as if we were furniture, background, things." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. I didn't interrupt him, because this moment was worth the wait. And then, only then, she turned to Thomas. "You don't remember what you said, Mr. Hargreave, but I remember every word." The verdict came in an hour later. Liable, on all counts, $11 million in damages, a public statement, federal oversight for 5 years. The courtroom exploded into motion. Reporters darted out. Langston was slumped in his chair. Thomas just stared at the floor. He'd lost the case. But worse, he'd lost the mask, and everyone had seen what was underneath. As the gallery emptied, Elisha packed her things slowly, carefully. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Thomas stood, walked toward her. He looked smaller than he had 2 days ago. Deflated, dismantled. "I didn't know," he said quietly. She finally met his eyes, cold, steady. "That's the problem," she replied. "You never do." Then she turned, walked down the aisle, and out the courtroom door. Her heels echoed like a gavel. He used to walk into rooms like he owned them. Now, Thomas Hargreave walked like the floor might fall through at any second. Day 3. The courtroom wasn't just a place of law anymore. It had become a stage of reckoning. The reporters didn't look at Langston. They didn't even focus on the jury. They looked at her, Elisha Montgomery. She didn't lean into the attention. She absorbed it, like granite absorbs the wind, steadfast, unmoved, unshaken. Thomas entered late. His tie was loose, his eyes hollow. His posture, a man who knew the verdict wasn't just in a file. It was on every face turned toward him. Langston didn't even nod. His lawyers had distanced themselves. PR had cut contact. His board? Silent. Even the judge noticed. "Elisha Montgomery," Judge Ramirez said, "you may make your final statement before we adjourn." Elisha rose with deliberate ease. She took a long moment before speaking, and when she did, her voice was barely above a whisper. Yet everyone heard. "Before I begin," she said, "I want to tell you a story." The room leaned forward. 2 days ago, I picked up a man outside this courthouse. He didn't look at me, didn't ask my name. He assumed I was the driver because I'm a black woman behind the wheel of a black SUV. He talked about people like me as if I couldn't hear, or worse, as if I didn't matter. No one moved. I didn't correct him. I didn't confront him. I just drove, because I wanted him to finish, to speak freely, to be honest. And he was. She paused. And when we arrived, he told me to go get coffee. A few heads turned toward Thomas. His skin looked clammy, his knuckles white. I've spent my entire life being underestimated, overlooked, spoken over, watched people smile in my face and strip my name off of credit, off of work, off of dignity. Her voice didn't shake. But that moment in the car wasn't new. It wasn't rare. It was every day in 100 different ways. Elisha took a step closer to the jury box, and I realized something. That wasn't just a moment of disrespect. It was a confession, a reflection of how entire companies, entire systems treat people who look like me, as invisible. She turned, scanning the courtroom. But I am not invisible. Silence. I am not your driver. I am not your assistant. I am not your quota. I am not your background. She pointed gently toward the defendant's table. That man built his entire career believing that people like me didn't belong in courtrooms unless we were mopping the floor or being sentenced. And today, she said quietly, we proved him wrong. The judge called the session to a close. The gavel echoed like a final heartbeat. People stood, packed up. Whispers began again. But Alicia stayed still, watching Thomas. And then, with grace only she could carry, she walked, right past him. No words, no glare, no triumphal smirk, just presence, just visibility. Outside the courthouse, the press swarmed her, microphones in every direction. Ms. Montgomery, how does it feel to take down one of the top defense lawyers in Atlanta? Alicia, was this personal? What message do you want to send to black professionals across the country? She held up one hand. The crowd fell quiet. Then she spoke, just one sentence. If they don't see you, make them look. Then she walked to the curb. A black SUV waited. This time, she sat in the back, and the driver, an older black woman with silver braids and a quiet smile, opened the door with a nod of pride. Elisha got in, closed the door, and leaned back as the city passed outside the window. Inside the courtroom, Thomas sat alone. The janitor came in quietly to collect trash from the rows. He looked at Thomas but didn't say anything. Didn't need to, because for the first time in his life, Thomas Hargreave wasn't the one being looked at, wasn't the voice that mattered, wasn't the name on the victory. He was just there. And now, he knew what it felt like to be invisible.